that are guide wires and stents and things like that that have fluoropolymer parts, but those are considered category B, that they're temporary contact. They're not permanently implantable. Again, the Zeus vision is you could have blood vessels and organs and pumps and whatever made out of fluoropolymers that, solve unmet needs in the healthcare industry. And so I think the general, I guess in my opinion, the general thing would be where fluoropolymers not being used, that is a big space that they could be used, because unfortunately fluoropolymers are used in all kinds of stuff, from aerospace wire, datacom wire, all the places we've talked about, non-stick coating, as you mentioned, for bakeware and cookware. But the human body is largely untapped potential. It's certainly got a lot of liability, and that's why DuPont decided to kind of restrict that segment. Basically required indemnifications and large players. So they're limited in how far that's gone. But somebody like a Zeus or the Gore folks that are looking at healthcare as a new market opportunity, that to me would be the short answer to your question, is where are fluoropolymers not being used today that they could be, and that's a big one. And I guess the secondary thought is, except for the people like Saint-Gobain and Zeus to some extent, and people like that, the companies, the processors are somewhat segregated in working with melt processable like PFA, FEP, TFE versus PTFE. A lot of small companies that started out as independents make stock shapes out of PTFE. So they make rods, or they make skives film, or blocks, molded blocks that can be further machined into parts. There's a number of companies like that, but you're really not in a particular market segment. You're selling those stock shapes to somebody that's essentially not processing fluoropolymers. They're cutting them, machining them, making seals and gaskets out of them, that kind of thing. But I wouldn't see that as an attractive acquisition necessarily, because a lot of stock shapes actually nowadays get made in China and then get purchased by downstream players around the world. So it's kind of a low margin area. And a lot of those smaller processors that really developed the fluoropolymers industry have either been swallowed up or gone out of business, etc. One that comes to mind was family-owned Allstate Plastics in New Jersey. Typical entrepreneur fluoropolymer processor of 25 years ago. I think they're probably still in business, but tough market there, just making shapes and not creating much value beyond a stock shape.
Okay. So that makes sense. And maybe to try to wrap up this question around M&A candidates, the small and mid-sized businesses, are there any other names that you might want to add to that list of companies to consider? Either they're directly in PFA or they're in something that would make sense to add to a PFA business?
I can't think of somebody in the melt side that we haven't already talked about. I mean, maybe when we get done with this segment, you can throw up a couple names and I'll see what I've heard or what I know about them. Okay. But there's a lot of niches, again, maybe more on the PTFE side, but there's membranes